Yeah, welcome to a new episode of the Solar Journey. We have something special happening today. We've had two guests in one show before, so that's not new, but we have our first returning guests today. Tobias Schütt and Langen have shared various parts of their solar and Cleantech journeys during their extensive careers. And they are now joining forces as the founders and joint managing directors of Cleantech Bridge. Gentlemen, thanks for joining again. Welcome.
Thanks for having us.
Thank you, Torsten. It's a pleasure.
Excellent. Yeah, normally we like to chart the beginning of each journey by delving into the education and early professional experience of our guests. But, dear listeners, since we have returning guests, I'd encourage you to check our episode number 9 and 22 for the Cleantech Genesis stories of both Tobias and Christian. So let's get straight into the genesis of Cleantech Bridge. Christian, could you take us how you came together for this project? I'd like to believe, of course, you learned about each other through this podcast, but maybe that's not the case.
Well, that's not exactly true. We've known each other for about 20 years when we first worked close to each other at Conergy. And then our path went different ways. And they reconnected later on with DZ4. And Tobias founded the business, and I was supporting for a while on the board. And we were in regular conversation about a range of topics, and one thing where we both had a lot of passion for was seeing this gap in funding new technologies and startups when they get to a certain scale, when venture capital is not enough anymore and they need to maybe roll out assets. So that's where we connected on this topic, and when Tobias basically moved on, then we really thought, okay, we have to do something together with this, and ultimately that led to founding Cleantech Bridge earlier this year.
Excellent. Yeah, you just mentioned the gap you have observed in the market, and the company's name Cleantech Bridge is very instructive in that sense. So. Could you elaborate a bit more? What's the problem you're solving and how do you do it? Maybe Tobias, yeah?
Yeah, thank you. What we're facing, or really on a numerous basis, situations of successful clean tech companies that come to a stage where they are struggling financially, not because they have a bad product, but quite the opposite. They have traction. And specifically in cases of asset rollout, and maybe we stop here and define what does asset rollout mean. So a company that installs heat pumps, a company that installs battery systems, a company that has a new business model around clean technologies, a company that does biofuels or sustainable aviation fuels. Whenever they become successful and get more demand, someone needs to be there to finance those assets, again, be it heat pumps or whatever. And in order to capture a larger market share and to comply with more demand, it is often important to provide a financing solution associated with it. The example of DC4, we've talked about this on this podcast. It opened up a whole new market segment of customers that were interested in solar PV but didn't want to buy the system. And we see that also in the commercial and industrial segment and many different segments where those as a service arrangements just open up a bigger market opportunity and supports a clean tech rollout. But then the underlying question is, who owns that asset and who pays for that? And that's where venture capital investors are not the right investors anymore. They cannot provide those large amounts of fundings, and the return profiles do not match. And this is where the companies that are successful with their new business model, new technology, come to a point where they struggle financially, in the sense that they need to reorganize the financing of their entire organization in order to meet the demand that they created.
Okay. And so when you do a business plan for one of the companies you just outlined, you could have kind of foresee that a gap comes up, or is that kind of an unexpected, or was it for many players an unexpected situation that when you roll out, when you're too successful, maybe that this gap shows up, or was that, how does that come about that you suddenly have that gap as you roll out, as you scale your company?
Well, I wouldn't say it's sudden. Of course, you do realize that at some point, if you are successful, you need to be able to install a lot of systems and fund that. But I think in the early stage, venture capital investors are pushing for growth, and I think it's not clearly understood or often enough talked about. So what happens when we reach this point where venture capital may not be the best solution anymore? It's only the assumption, okay, we are successful then, so somebody will come and fund it. But the unfortunate truth is that these investors that you expect to come are often not ready, particularly in this clean tech space where you don't have 20 years of track record and you can say, okay, heat pumps have been around for so long and in large numbers. Let's look at what happens after 20 years. That's often a requirement for those so-called infrastructure investors who look at really risk. So if you have something innovative without a long track record, it's very difficult to convince those investors that you initially assume will just be there when you are successful. It's maybe a question of how do you define success? And in an early startup, you define it differently than if you are a later stage or infrastructure investor.
So if we see that initially funds a startup, would expect that maybe at some point, once there is sufficient success, for example, strategic investor comes in, buys the company and takes it from there. And that didn't happen because those strategics are very conservative. Is that's a appropriate description, or who was the original, let's say, target then for the VC to buy the shares, and why don't they come, or why don't they buy?
Well, I wouldn't necessarily say that it always has to be a strategic investor. I think this is more about how do you finance bringing more clean tech into the world than the corporate side of a startup. These two things ideally work together. Ideally, you have a solution for how do I grow my company, and then a solution for how do I help customers buy this, and a solution for who is ultimately investing into those hundreds of thousands of solar systems or heat pumps or batteries. And this doesn't always come together. And that's, I think, part of the challenge.
So the assets would be the let's say the heat pumps, the solar system, which are in a lease contract with the final user, and these are the assets that need to be then taken over by the new investor, right? And they are afraid of that risk to have these many assets. Is that a correct understanding?
Maybe we provide you with an example or things that we see here in the market. Let's say the venture capital investors are usually organized as funds, and the typical fund volume is 100 million euros or 200 million euros. Some are smaller, others are bigger. But let's say it's that type of fund structure. Let's just assume it's 100 million euros. So that means as a professional investment company, the fund can only do an allocation of 5 million euros or 10 million euros in one company. And the other element that is important to understand is that those funds usually have a lifetime or a term, typically 10 years. So they invest over time span, and at some time the fund terminates, and that means that a venture capital investor has a limit per target that they can invest, and they have a return requirement over a time span, like at 5 to 10 years, because the fund ends. And then now let's take as an example, because we tapped on it, the heat pump rollout in Germany, retail market, but also C&I market. So first of all, those arrangements with customers are generally 20 years, maybe they are 15 years, others are 25 years. So in those lease arrangements, an investment is done. It provides a return to the investor of, let's say, 8%, 10%, but it takes 20 years for the return to materialize. And there you see one of the specific problems. Venture capital could not invest in that if it's like a time, if they need to, pay back the investors in their fund after 10 years, they cannot make that investment because the timing doesn't work.
All right.
And the other element is, and we're also talking about retail heat pump, just because it is an example. It's not limited to heat pump rollout in Germany. Just want to be sure. So let's say there's a heat pump company that did their, seed round, Series A, have raised 10 million euros from different venture capital investors. Now they are super successful for whatever. Somehow they did their first SPVs, so the company that holds all these assets, maybe that was only 5 million euros. Now they have their business plan lined up for the next years, and it says, we want to build thousands of heat pump installations in this as a service model. That means an investment of, let's just put out a number, 100 million euros over the next 2 years. And here's the other problems that venture capital investors are faced with. As much as they'd like that, they couldn't do it because the investment amount is just much too high for them not to create an allocation risk in one company. And that's where success of a company becomes a burden, because as Christian said, when you're, and I'm not saying that founders are naive, but if you're successful, you just assume you get funding for that, and the real difficulty is changing the language and changing the approach to the investors that are adequate investors in that asset base, and the different mentalities associated with that, and the different business models associated with that. And that is something where different companies have struggled in the past, and there are some great examples of companies that did that very successfully, but it remains a challenge that comes to awareness now more and more, but really is an uneducated and underdeveloped scheme to finance those first larger chunks of assets for companies that are successful but not yet profitable and don't have that long track record that Christian mentioned. Does that make sense?
Yeah, thanks a lot. So, okay, I got the point. Excellent. So it's really about these new businesses, new technologies, short track record, and suddenly gigantic volume that makes it then suddenly difficult to find someone who takes it to the next level. That would be my my recap of hopefully correct one.
Sure.
Good one.
Yeah.
So this is where Cleantech Bridge comes in. What's your USP? Is that mainly your as Cleantech Bridge of the two of you? Because you've been in the market for so long, you understand both languages. You were talking about using the right terminology. Is it your know-how, your experience? What's your USP, or is there many others who could do that?
I hope there are many others who could do that, but I can only speak for us. I think education is one key aspect how this can be solved, and that needs understanding of both of these perspectives. As I said before, it's like VCs look at growth, and infrastructure investors look at risk. And you see those founders using their growth story and going into somebody who's only looking at, that looks risky. Okay. I want to only grow, and I have only a limited return, and that needs to be, and the other way around. So we've experienced both of these sides. We've been working as individuals as well as together with investors and startups on both of these sides. So I think on the one side, we can build a bridge or translate and try to bring them closer together, make the more infrastructure-oriented investors understand that not having 20 years track record is maybe not that bad, because the principal technologies have been there. The risks they are perceiving may not be as big as, they may not be as big in reality. At the same time, helping investors on the venture capital side understand where their limits are and where their role can be in this. and the startups themselves, how to communicate with these different groups and when to basically switch. You need to professionalize your business at some point to be ready for that next stage. And I think that's something that many also don't get at the right time, only when it's possibly too late. So I think it is this mix of experiences as being entrepreneurs ourselves, but also having helped investors, trying to understand that and bridging these gaps.
Bridging, there it is again. Very good term you found for your company. Yeah. Tobias, yeah.
Christian, I think I wanted to add one element to that. I guess Christian and I we've both been in the industry for over 20 years. So next to the experience, by now we really have also a super great network of relationships to investors and companies, and can make those connections faster or build those bridges faster and more efficient than probably others could do. At the same time, Torsten, not that this goes into the wrong direction. This is not a pitch about Cleantech Bridge, and we don't want to, pitch the idea of the company too much. It's what we're describing is, referred to as the first of a kind or next of a kind finance problem. And it would be great for all of us if there's more education on that, of more people went into that theme and helped solving it, be it investors or companies. So this is not, so in that sense, it's also a little bit the approach that Christian and I spend a lot of time in educating both companies and investors for free, just giving advice, sharing our perspectives, giving examples, what we've done in the past, and, helping those companies or investors, to bridge the gap. And that is not, so far Cleantech Bridge has never advised under a mandate a startup or a growth company. That's not our approach. It's difficult for them to find those budgets. We rather support investors in these types of situation, and again pointing out that education is a really strong element of our activities, and talking about and making aware of the element and trying to influence the market actors to be at least aware of it, and then finding solutions individually in transactions.
So you just mentioned, did I get that correct? It's a first of a kind problem, really, in the world of finance and, let's say, tech. Is that so?
And maybe next of a kind one would add as well. I mean, it's not only the first, but first and next of a kind. But the core of this challenge is with new concepts, assets, business models that don't have sufficiently long term.
Excellent.
And I think where one could, how one can approach and solve this, and that's where we're also active, is in possibly creating different funds that don't work within those classical categories of VC and infrastructure, but that combine some of these aspects. That's also one of those things we're helping with.
Excellent. Thanks both of you. So let's stay a little with Cleantech Bridge. So who's exactly your clients? Is it the founders, the startups, or is it more the investor side, the money side that you would describe as your clients? And what's your business model? So it's education. Sometimes sounds like a pro bono thingy. What's your business model here?
No, fair question. So we're not entirely philanthropic. So we aim to make some money with that as well. So that is true. And at the same time, we don't have a venture capital hockey stick business case as Cleantech Bridge equity advisors. We're working on the specific phenomena that we just described, and our activities are talking to both sides of the market. We talk a lot to companies that are in the startup phase or in the growth phase, and engage with them, and they reach out to us and then asking how we can take the next step in terms of financing, and we provide our opinion and our advice and get a market overview. And we do that also understanding the problems in the market and understanding who is active in the market, like matchmaking in the sense that we also engage in conversations with investors, infrastructure investors, venture capital investors, private equity investors, understanding where they are in the market, what their needs are, and in that way try to do matchmaking. And generally, we advise investors. That's the only mandates that we have signed so far, that we advise investors both on transactions, but also on more strategic elements like what Christian mentioned, fund design. How can we solve those problems that we just described? So our customers, in the sense, are both investors and companies, but the mandates where we get paid, if you want to put it that way, is the investor side for different reasons. Christian, do you want to add to that?
No, I just think there's probably a bigger education need, as well as the ability to be part of some transactions. So we help to identify interesting investment targets. We help to look at those that are being presented at the opportunities, give an opinion on those. But because we also work with so many startups, we tend to have a really good overview of what's going on. And that's helpful.
Yeah, excellent. Just one more question on Cleantech specifically. So is it the two of you, or do you have extra staff? And where do you wanna take Cleantech Bridge? Let's say in 5 years. Just a typical question an investor would ask a startup.
I mean, it's a fair question, but currently it's the two of us together with a network of freelancers that we have basically at the back if there's need in transactions to get additional support. And where do we want to take that company? Very, very specifically, it's not a venture capital growth company. So we want to be successful. We want to help transactions. We want to help fund the market, and we will definitely grow, because at this point we have much more demand than we can comply with as two individuals. And it's really the question about timing and where and how to grow the organization. But right now we decline more mandates than we accept. So that also supports our case that we're working on something that is needed in the market, that there is a gap in the market that needs to be filled. So yeah, it's growth, but we're both, I think, thankful that we're now working in a different type of tough setup, me being in that super long 10-year VC cycle, and then Christian also as executive board member. But I shouldn't talk for you, I should talk for myself.
So just to add, I mean, what we both do is value our independence, and that also creates value for customers. So we're not under pressure to do this or that. Educating is as much part of our goal as is growing business or turnover. So we can be very picky with what we do. That's the biggest advantage we have. And otherwise, again, we do value our independence and love to work in this type of setup. So no goal of hiring 100 people and getting any investors.
Excellent. In. Very, very cool choice. Christian, back then when you were on the show the first time, you described yourself as a free radical. So it seems you want to keep that the characteristics. Yeah.
Yes, absolutely.
So we only can hope for the whole industry that you and Tobias, you don't attract each other too much. So you create a you avoid being a radical, right? Yeah.
I live in Helsinki. That helps. Being separated by country.
All right, excellent. Yeah, but I'm sure you go fishing once in a while in one of the Finnish lakes.
Yes.
All right. Yeah. In terms of attracting funds, there are business angels, there are VCs, there's private equity, family office, there are loans. So, which are the financing methods you are addressing then to close that gap? Right. We talked about the issue. So, what are solutions that you see?
So, what we've learned from experience and what we've seen in the market is that in those early stages of a company, it is important to find the right investor base, in the sense that maybe I should start differently. If you have the situation that we described, where there's, let's say, a company or an SPV, special purpose vehicle, with a lot of heat pumps, and that needs to be filled, automatically there's a key questions where the profits in this business model, where do they occur? Where are they shifted to? Are those in the SPV, or are those at the developer level, or the company that is building those assets? And that provides a conflict eventually between investors in the SPV on the assets and the investors in the company that builds those assets, because basically both want, maximize their profits. I'm exaggerating a little bit. It's always about, fairness and understanding each other. But still, if you are a company that does not yet have stable processes, where everything is very early on, like all the details of such a business model are not really worked out in full detail, you need flexibility. And you don't really know where it is best to put that margin or that risk element. And if you need to define that and lock it in for a time period to do that transaction, it could really, the wear and tear on your organization can be very high if you do that. So the best thing is that you have invest an investor in both business models, so to say. So the long-term cash flow business model in the SPV and the operational company, in order to limit the friction in that conflict in early stages where the company is not yet quite as stable as a Siemens or whatever in their processes. And so what we support or advise is mechanisms where the investors, the early stage investors in those companies, provide funding for both, for the operational company that does, let's say, the installation, and for the SPV that holds those assets. Although those are very different business models, and we understand that this is a problem for some investors, like I mentioned, venture capital a couple of minutes ago. But still, we think it provides the best solution for the company to help growth and stabilizing processes and optimizing what they have. And that is basically the point that we're working on to facilitate those hybrid investments, as we call them, because one is a growth investment, the other is more like an infrastructure type of investment. And that's what we promote, facilitate, using structures of bigger deals to smaller and younger companies. Christian, can you add or reframe?
Maybe just to add, what I think who's going to win in this space are entrepreneurial investors, not just thinking in those old categories. And that's why we find in the discussions we have that family offices that often come from industrial families, someone who has built a business with all the challenges and different life cycles and growth, are well suited to go in there if they don't fall into the trap and try to copy the VC and the infrastructure model themselves, which some of them do as well. But we feel that is one good address. And the other one would be also larger private equity investors who dare to see the longer story and then tap a little bit earlier into this than they usually would. So both of these are among those people we speak to very closely.
Excellent. So the term SPV was mentioned now a few times. Let's assume there's plenty of engineers out there who don't understand all the financial terms that well. And maybe you can explain the SPV concept again with your heat pump company, or so this becomes a bit clearer why you have the company and SPVs and why it's then difficult to, it's not a classic transaction that you, or a simple transaction that you can do.
Christian, would you want to start? Should I? I'm not sure.
That's fine. I can say SPV stands for special purpose vehicle, which is nothing else but a company that has no operational business necessarily, but that owns all those heat pumps. So they're all in the ownership of this. If you lease a heat pump, you make your lease payment to this special purpose vehicle. So the company owns them, and the company gets the lease. And the company, this special company, then buys the heat pumps from somebody. So it's in the middle, and it is an independent entity one can invest into. Maybe to make
Excellent,
it very short.
good, yeah. Yeah, and you mentioned the special role that family office, which still have that original entrepreneurial spirit, could be an important role. So, what do these family offices need to be successful in that clean tech space with this, let's say, next to a kind situation that you described?
I think specifically when it comes to, early on or early stage investments or first of a kind investments that they do, it's about courage and doing what feels right and making judgments based on entrepreneurial experience. And that can provide an advantage in terms of superior returns or also better opportunities in the future. What do I mean by saying that? The advantage of deciding based on entrepreneurial experience differentiates them from institutional investors because they do checklist investments. If you have created a fund like a private equity investor or infrastructure investor, you've got your checklist, and that says, I need to have 3 years of track record. I need to have a profitable EPC company that built those systems, and so on, and so on, and so on. And many of those checklist items cannot be complied with by young companies, but still they create great assets, great heat pump installations. And so entrepreneurial judgment means, well, just because they don't have the track record, it doesn't mean that they build bad systems and that they've selected bad customers. And there you can step in and as a family office type of organization say, yes, I will invest in that and lead the way and to help that company create a track record so that in the next 2-3 years other investors can follow.
Yeah.
If that makes sense.
Yeah. So in other words, in the VCs, you have, let's say, investment managers who are employees to the fund. They go through the checklist. They can't check all the boxes, so that the risk remains for the infrastructure, right? That's the new situation here, and that risk is only compensated by entrepreneurial spirit, which you sometimes find in the family office you mentioned. Is that correct? Is that the correct understanding? So you compensate risk with entrepreneurial spirit and hopefully extra upside, in your investment. Yeah.
No, I mean, I don't want to speak too badly about venture capital. Venture capital has an important place in all of this. So don't get this wrong. It's just only part of the solution. Yeah. And I think the advantage of family offices is that they sometimes are managing generational wealth. So they're not really limited by 7-year, 10-year term, but they can do something today that has a long-term impact easier than others can. And ultimately, although all the three of us probably have been in this for 20 years, we're still at the beginning of this all. So you need to be able to respond, be quick, change pathway, and not so much just look at, does somebody fulfill a particular forecast, or the way of managing a business, the way of understanding and driving it, I feel is often different when you have a very entrepreneurial investor.
What? Yeah.
I think one element that I would like to add, that all investors that I know use common sense in their decision-making process. Also venture capital investors, all types of investors, also banks when they issue loans. But still, for venture capital investors and other types of investors, there's only such a span of wiggle room where they can decide and use their common sense, because there's limitations from the fund structure and from the due diligence requirements that they have. And that common sense element can be higher and more important in entrepreneurial decisions from family offices or private wealth individuals that invest, and they can rely more on their commercial on their common sense than other investors. And I think that's just important, because why am I saying that? I've had situations in the past where venture capital investors said, look, and this is related to asset roll, I totally understand, and it's a good investment, and I would like to do that, an investment in SPV, but I cannot do that from the fund structure. I don't believe it's going to fail. I think it's a good investment, but I simply cannot do that. And that's where the common sense element of entrepreneurial decisions is probably a little bit different.
Okay. Excellent. Thanks. What are success stories for bridging this gap? Christian.
Well, I think there are some that we think are developing right now, where particularly larger investors have taken a step into this. For example, a large investor investing in Viria earlier this year, and saying we combine corporate investment with a lot of asset rollout, or very recently, I think this week, in a sustainable aviation fuel startup, where the same thinking applied. Okay, we want to support the company, but we also know they need 500 million in the next few years to build plants. So this is what we also have reserved. So I think there's an increasing understanding of this, but there are not so many examples in Cleantech where I would say that's where the case is very clear. I think they're just evolving. Yeah. But Tobias, please add a few.
No, I would agree. I mean, we can go back in our history, Christian and I, we have had successful first of a kind financing solutions, but I don't want to dig into that too deeply, actually. I think another element that I wanted to add is that we are learning about investors that come from the infrastructure side and that cannot take those early stage risks, and they've experienced situations where they liked the asset base and wanted to invest in it, but couldn't do it because due diligence protocol said the company that is building those systems, that is not profitable, so we cannot finance that. It's a very typical problem, by the way. And they decided to set up their own venture capital fund. And I think that's just great, because then out of one umbrella, so to say, you have an entity that can provide both that corporate funding that is needed and the asset funding that is also needed. And that is like a super great example. It's still a little bit on the radar screen, so we cannot talk openly about it, but that is something that is currently developing, where such an investor that sees that problem, acts immediately, sets up their own VC fund to solve that problem. And we anticipate more of that to come.
Okay, interesting. Let's switch to the current market situation. We are speaking in the year 2024, for the record. We are feeling a cooling of the market for installation of solar systems across the spectrum here in Europe, but I think also, for example, in the US. Here in Europe, after a peak driven by Russia's invasion of Ukraine. How challenging is that for young clean tech companies? We just learned that solar is laying off 50% of their employees. This could be one example for the difficult situation right now.
Yeah, it's very challenging right now if you're in B2C, business to consumer solar. And it's a mix of different effects. When the power prices went up, everyone had solar in their mind. When the supply situation was difficult, now many people have pulled their investment forward. And at the same time, the companies were growing and they're pushing hard. So the customer acquisition costs have gone up significantly. At the same time, there was uncertainty about the prices that were falling. So if the price is falling and it's electricity, so you do have electricity, you don't have to replace it right now, then you wait. When is the bottom reached? So there's just a range of factors that come together. in our solar coaster. I think it's not necessarily a long-term effect, but it is one that obviously is already too much for some companies to bear at this point, and they have to take consequences. So yes, I think now resilience is the question. Who can be more resilient during that phase? I don't think it'll be forever. Plus, of course, the requirements by customers are changing. You need to be able to do storage. You need to be able to do a few other things. You need to have some more intelligence in there. That goes for large scale as much as for smaller scale and residential. Very soon, you don't have to start a pure solar farm anymore because the duck curve is developing much faster than it has before. So you need to plan storage right from the start. You need to think about co-location with wind. So I think this market is just changing very quickly, and in this change, there's also political uncertainties and crossfire and communication from all sides. So it's quite an unfortunate mix for some.
Yeah. Certainly, yeah. You just mentioned storage and intelligence. Everything is in the flux right now in the energy market, right? I guess you could have seen it, but now it's really happening, and the broad audience is now experience the companies, the private households, the companies, the consumers. We are seeing increasing incidences of negative prices. How do you see this development in terms of opportunities or threats for innovative companies, and who will be possibly losers in this game?
That's a good question. Who are winners and losers? I think what Christian's comment, by the way, to the last question was excellent, if I may say that, because it's just in 2 words putting the entire complexity of the current situation into those 2 minutes was, in my opinion, was just.
It's on record, so you can reuse it. So
good that we have a company together. And what really struck me is the speed of the development. I mean, we Christian also wrote about this, that we anticipate, that the cycles, going to happen, but the speed and is just insane. Like 1 year ago, super hype in the retail market, in the C&I and utility scale market. Project rights were purchased at, from today's perspective, humongous amounts, and now everything has fallen off the cliff. No demand, and in the duck curve, as you said, with negative prices,
maybe
puts
to add
a lot of
on your questions, who are going to be the winners and losers. I mean, winners are going to be those that have a certain speed of change. And if I look at in industry and see the public conversation in Germany, I'm starting to sweat for some of the industrial players. Everyone who takes energy, electricity, and energy in general just as an item you're going to buy forever is going to be in trouble, because the option of making some of it or much of it yourself is the more attractive option, and your competitors will start to do that. They'll start to use storage. They'll start to use the heat loads as a storage when power is for free. They will connect things. They will manage this. You will be at a competitive disadvantage if you just moan and complain about energy prices but still continue to just buy power somewhere. It's really about take this into your own hands. All the tools are there. And I think that's who's among the winners and losers. And in terms of in the industry, it's those that can make that perceived complexity of that new energy world simple for their customers. Those are going to be the winners.
Simplicity, yeah. We see a lot of storage coming online, and for a long time there was the demand for changes in the regulatory system, right? So that storage can be used. And I assume that is still the case, that we need to do changes in Germany, but I guess more in most markets to make the adoption, let's say, easier or more attractive. But at the same time, I feel that the market is growing so quickly because it's just so attractive due to the negative prices, or just by the, let's say, sexiness as well, to have that kind of small box in your home, or even for commercial applications. what do you think of that, let's say, opinion observation of mine? Is that the case, or where do you see, let's say, strong gaps still in the regulatory system or issues? Yeah.
It's still too complex. I mean, sorry if I it's still too complex to participate in the market. I mean, you have your Bilanzkreise, you have your, I mean, if you have a large BES system and it's a market that is still shaking out somehow. I can see that here in Finland that there's a lot of BES installations currently happening, and the grid operator is really supporting that because they realize they have created a very well functioning frequency response market, and you can have a very easy business case with this. So I buy power actually on the spot market. 50% of the people do this here, which is a difference to us. So you actually see a change in behavior among the customers, which is one important thing when power prices go up. And I think the opportunities are always there, but regulation is always slower than industry. And we'll have to live with that for a while, I guess.
Would you say that Finland is a kind of a role model then in the, let's say, modern electricity market design? Particularly when compared to Germany, where things are still strict and you don't have that kind of flexibility.
Well, the honest answer is it's just much easier to do this in a country that has basically one grid operator and is much smaller here. So I think the digitalization started much earlier, and I think the investment started earlier. That's more like a time advantage.
Yeah. Do you see the right decisions being made all over Europe or the rest of the world, so that you, let's see a stepwise approach to that, or is it? How would you describe the speed and the readiness to adopt to the new grid design or regulatory system that allows the flexibility that we need for a high intake of renewables?
To be honest, I don't have the perspective of the overall world, but I would really emphasize Christian's comment on that the industry is always faster than regulation. I mean, that's just what we've seen, and really what we're learning also from what Christian described, and what we're seeing is that flexibility is somehow the new generation, right? This is the important element that you can manage, where you can shift loads and all those elements, and how that is incorporated into legislation takes more time than what companies and consumers effectively do that have adopted the instruments that you need for that.
Yeah.
I think it's very clear that companies are smart and quick at adopting to this. So revenue stacking is the big word in batteries. Just really deciding on a day-by-day basis which type of market are we playing in here. Are we getting paid just for having capacity ready to go? Are we actively selling this into a frequency response market, up, frequency down? So it's really this kind of, how can we stack different revenue sources? That's what the game is, and it turns into a software game, into a simulation game. So there are new products possible there. Industry is always going to be faster than the regulatory environment.
Amazing. Who would have thought that there's so much to be done in the energy market, right? Like 30 years ago, it was like all set. Everybody was happy. And now we have to switch to clean energy, and everything is shaken up, right? Amazing industry, amazing market. Lots to explore here. Hey, as always, at the end, I like to ask, as a kind of summary or outlook, let's put it this way, what does it take to get solar to the next level? If you like, you can focus on your specific interest, the financing model, but also you can take, or both, take a more complete perspective on the, let's say, energy market, the cleantech industry. Maybe, who wants to go first? Christian? Tobias?
I think I can happy to go first. I think for more solar, the answer is probably more storage. In the sense that the duck curve is just getting worse, and the risk is that the success of solar is just so high that it jeopardizes the future success, and the solution for that is more storage, really.
Yeah.
My perspective.
Yeah.
It may be counterintuitive, but I personally think we have already reached a tipping point. Every day, 100,000 people around the planet say, we want to go solar with our company, with a house, while about 10 big committees say we're going to build some huge power plant next year or in 10 years. Look, this game is run. I'm sorry. Solar is the cheapest source together with wind. Storage is exploding. And where I'm always amazed is people compare these technologies. What they forget is a solar panel that you put out there is going to produce power for 25 years without ever touching it again, for 30 years, for 40 years if need be. And that's fundamentally different from building a power plant that you need to constantly feed with something. And it's really, this is a fundamental thought. It's so simple. But in many conversations, I feel people really continue to underestimate solar. It will grow because 100,000 people have made the decision just today. They will join this.
Yeah.
They will.
Fantastic closing remark, Christian, Tobias. Wonderful, gentlemen. Thanks a lot for joining again. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
I wish you all the best in your educating the markets to facilitate new startups, new ideas, new business model to happen. Thanks a lot for helping them grow, and thanks a lot for make it easier to switch to 100% renewables very soon. Thanks a lot, guys. Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Thank you, Torsten.
Bye-bye.
Have a good day.
Thanks.
Bye-bye.